Any other cards? You want to bring those up? Why don't we take the public comments or the specific comments up front? I have Caitlin Ballas with Public Counsel, comments on subject matter 2 and 3. I have Crisal Rodriguez, California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. Rob Kwan. Close the general reading. This is the specific. I'm going to cut all these cards. After, I think he wants to talk about something specific. Carrie Kaiser, are you here? Okay. Graciela Lopez, are you here? Thank you. Christine Browning. Hey, Christine. Val Carlson. Great, thank you. And Marianne Curtis. Yes.
Are they going to come to speak?
Yes. No, I'm just checking to see if they were here. You asked me if they were here, so I answered the question. Okay, so come on up. Let's start with Rob. Let's start with the first two we mentioned, Caitlin and Crisal. Caitlin, are you here? Okay, she had to step out. Okay, well then how about Rob Kwan? Who stepped out, Crisal or Caitlin?
Rob Kwan. Oh, Caitlin stepped out.
Are you Crisal? Please come up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, is this multiple or a single item comment?
I think multiple works for us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. I want to commend you for taking initiative and beginning discussions of SB 54 that will no doubt have a significant impact on the lives of all immigrant residents in Los Angeles. The reason why I stand before you today is to ask that you continue to be courageous by also addressing the question of law enforcement within your discussions of SB 54. The LA Police Department is currently redrafting Special Order 40, which continues to allow for collaboration between themselves and ICE that jeopardizes the lives of many immigrants, including myself. We continue to see the inhumane ways in which ICE and Border Patrol are hunting down residents across the nation, including seeking out a 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy at a hospital and detaining a man who was driving his daughter to school. The practices undertaken by ICE under the new presidential administration are becoming more and more inhumane. In February of this year, Los Angeles officials, including the mayor, urged ICE agents to stop identifying themselves as police, citing that this practice undermined decades of work by the LAPD in building trust within the city's large immigrant community. We already see the consequences of that. The LAPD reported that there has been a 25% decline in the reporting of sexual assault among the city's Latino population compared to last year's statistics. They also reported a decline of Latinos reporting of domestic violence cases amid a climate of anti-immigrant sentiment. As it stands in its current draft, Special Order 40 allows for the deportation of many immigrants, including those that may be innocent, as data shows that ICE uses information of those arrested and booked to target immigrants in jail who are not convicted of a crime. Given the lack of access to representation and inability to pay for bail, immigrants may feel compelled to admit to crimes that they may have not committed, which can have unintended consequences, such as the initiation of their process for deportation. Even those immigrants who have made poor choices do not deserve to be taken away from their families and community members. We already saw what occurred when the United States decided to report gang members en masse to their countries of origin. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Hi, my name is Caitlin Bellis, and I'm an attorney with Public Counsel, which is a nonprofit law firm here in Los Angeles. I represent detained people in their removal proceedings, and I am here today to urge the council to pass a strong and robust ordinance that does everything in its power to protect our city's immigrant residents. It is crucial that the council ensure that, and this committee take the first steps to ensure that the council and the city do everything to limit the collection of data to prevent ICE collaboration with ICE, and especially law enforcement collaboration with ICE, and also to take steps to reduce the number of people who end up in ICE's hands through the process of being booked and fingerprinted. As soon as someone is fingerprinted, those fingerprints automatically go to DHS, and so there's nothing that can be done to stop that transfer of that information, and so it's critical that we stop it at the juncture of the fingerprints being taken, and that's possible by reform of certain policies, but also of decriminalizing a number of misdemeanors and turning them into infractions, and instead of booking people, ensuring that they're just cited. And these are really critical steps to take to ensure that a moment of bad decision or even just a misunderstanding doesn't lead to someone being ripped apart from their family and community. This committee is a leader in this issue, and I thank you for that. But I urge you to do as much as you can and as quickly as you can to ensure that a robust ordinance and these various means of decriminalizing various offenses that you undertake that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Caitlin? Can I ask you on behalf of Public Counsel to delineate, give us a list of those misdemeanors that you are concerned about? As you know, we've begun a process of decriminalizing street vending.
Yes.
And we're looking to create a citywide policy that addresses that. Please bring to our attention the other areas where we may be able to...
Yes, I'd be happy to follow up with a memo.
Thank you. Rob Kwan, has he returned? Is he here with us?
Rob Kwan, I live in District 1 and organize with March and Rally LA. With regards to Agenda Item 2, the CLA report presents a number of recommendations on page 4, the last of which asks the city attorney to review and report on immigrant advocates' recommendations regarding police practices. My recommendation would be that, we add in an additional recommendation in there, or follow up with a separate motion to ensure that this council fully weighs in on Special Order 40. The CLA's report offers a few bullet points on concerns, ways we could handle things, but don't really thoroughly explore the issue. My greatest concern is that our elected representatives are not keeping pace with LAPD. They're moving forward with Special Order 40 and revising it, and as much as we can say that there's a separate process there, we can speak at public comment there, advocates are meeting, a lot of those things happen behind closed doors. A lot of the decision-making happens before issues come to the Board of Police Commissioners. It would greatly empower activists if our 15 city council members weighed in on Special Order 40, actually evaluated the issue so that we can get it right. We're not going to have to come back and follow up that we need a strong and thorough sanctuary ordinance. My concern is if we look at the recent resolution presented by a number of council members declaring LA a city of sanctuary, it inaccurately describes Special Order 40. The resolution claims that the order prohibits officers from initiating any action to determine immigration status. In actuality, Special Order 40 merely states officers shall not initiate police action with the objective of discovering immigration status. This is a nuanced distinction, but with con law, there's a wide amount of discretion that's given to law enforcement officers, especially when we're second-guessing an individual's claimed objective. Thank you.
Rob, I appreciate that. Could you please give us, delineate, not now, but maybe in writing or after, specific changes, concerns, and reforms that you would like to see in Special Order 40?
Sure, would love to, and I'd hope that the council considers that matter specifically so that LAPD has the council's weight of opinion there, because I think that matters a whole hell of a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Mylene Carberry?
Hi, I'm
Carrie
Yolanda.
Kaiser and Graciela Lopez, please prepare to come up.
Hi, my name is Meelan Carberry, and I'm here representing myself and also March and Rally LA. And we keep coming back to this issue, so I really feel like we need to put fire under our steps to get something done at this point, because we're lagging behind so many other cities when it comes to representing a majority of our residents and making sure that they feel safe. With Sheriff McDonald's recent, with the unfolding of his recent lies, it just brings Joe Arpaio to my mind, because there's obviously a focus on going after people of color, and this is a problem. This is, it's not just the law, it's a racial issue. So I would love to see this city that I call my home really protect my neighbors, protect my neighbors' children, and so that people feel safe. I've spoken to schools around the city because I had wanted them to come out for an event. They said they couldn't come out for the event because it was too political, but the people at the head desk said, but it really bothers me when I see children coming to school scared and not wanting to come to school because they're afraid when they go home, someone will be gone. Someone will be picked up. They will lose a cousin, a grandmother, a parent. And this is really, really disturbing. As a mother, I want to know that everyone at these schools gets supported in the greatest fashion by our city, and that means keeping their families safe. When our sheriff is lying to the public, he's supposed to be representing me. Don't lie to me and say you're keeping my neighbors safe when you're not. You're targeting them for whatever reasons you have. And I don't support that. We need to separate, and our LAPD should be protecting our community, sitting down with families and seeing what makes them feel safe and taken care of in our community, not collaborating with a federal mission to separate people. Thank you.
Thank you. Emmy McLean? Excuse me. I called you before, though, right? Yes, please come up.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Graciela, and I work for the California Immigrant Policy Center. I'm here to urge the committee to pass a strong sanctuary city ordinance. I am an organizer. I work with community members and families, and every day these families are scared. Folks are being detained, they're being deported, families are suffering every day. Again, I'm working with these communities and these families on a day-to-day basis, and the threats and the constant policing and criminalization does not stop. As previously mentioned, the LAPD has already started looking to update Special Order 40. The order is problematic in many ways. One of them is requiring and asking for the place of birth of an individual upon arrest, and that's not required under the law. Again, this is very troubling, and the LAPD, the law enforcement agency, is already looking to update a policy. However, we haven't seen in action by our elected officials. So again, we urge you to speed up the process and put forth a sanctuary city policy that protects all undocumented LA City residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Was it Carrie Kaiser? Go ahead, Eamon.
Council Chair, Council President, and Council members. Thanks for creating this space and for your efforts, and definitely want to just welcome and recognize your efforts, Mr. Cedillo, to seek specific recommendations on what offenses should be decriminalized and are particularly devastating for the immigrant community, and specific recommendations on modifications to LAPD policy.
We would like to replicate what we hope will be a successful effort on street vending. The price of deportation is too high a cost for selling popsicles, we
Yes,
think.
and for many other crimes.
And
I mean,
for many
driving
other
without a
crimes.
license, we know, is devastating in the
Well,
immigrant community.
That's why we changed that law, so hopefully many immigrants will join the close to 1 million new motorists who are driving with a license. We don't need to drive without a license anymore because we've changed that law. It only took 20 years, I know, but it needs to be enforced. By that I mean it needs to be executed by people who have a new opportunity to drive legally, and we should encourage that.
Yeah, and other minor offenses which either can be decriminalized or dealt with through citations rather than arrests. As has been mentioned, arrests automatically trigger booking and fingerprinting, sharing information with ICE. I've spoken with someone in your district, actually, who had been living here for over 20 years, had a prior deportation from more than 20 years earlier, had been arrested, never charged, but several weeks after his arrest, which was just a couple of months ago, he was picked up by ICE at his house with the information that he got from that arrest, and then deported within 24 hours, and his wife and daughter are trying to get him back now. I won't belabor the stories, but if you bear with me for another minute, since we had a little back and forth, I do want to acknowledge that, or share the messages of some of the others who have spoken before me, that a really strong ordinance is necessary at the city level, but also that the city is going to be behind in engaging on an ordinance if it doesn't engage right now with LAPD, which is at the final stages of revising an immigration policy for the first time in nearly 40 years. This policy, many people have been involved in conversations around, but there are some serious concerns around the policy. I have a letter that has been presented to LAPD. I unfortunately only have a couple of copies, but can share it with you and can provide subsequently. But the main concerns, just very briefly, are information collection around immigration status and place of birth, particularly place of birth, information sharing with ICE where that's not required. Obviously, in some areas it's required, but where it's not required. Collaboration with ICE in terms of making criminal immigration arrests for immigration enforcement, or engagement in joint task forces, and then, as we talked about, criminalization where that's not necessary and leads to deportation. Thank you so much.
Can you please bring that to our attention with the specificity in terms of either writing or meeting with our office?
Yes, I'll give you this in writing right now.
Thank you. Carrie?
Hi, I want to thank Councilmember Cedillo for pronouncing my last name correctly. I get a lot of Kaiser, so thank you for that. I'm Carrie. I live in District 4, and according to the ACLU, they estimate that 70% of deportations happen as a result of direct or indirect cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities, which of course means local law enforcement's collaboration is the most important driver for the president's deportation machine, and the City Council has the ability to throw a wrench into that machine. Despite claims by both Chief Beck and Mayor Garcetti that the LAPD does not assist Homeland Security and immigration enforcement, they actively assist them by collecting and sharing information they don't need to have, participating in joint task forces that result in collateral immigration arrests, giving ICE access to jails without a judicial warrant, and by criminalizing minor offenses. These issues need to be addressed in LAPD's own updating of its immigration policy and in a sanctuary ordinance. A lot of immigration rights activists have said, and I agree, that SB 54 is definitely just a floor, not a ceiling, and that's kind of how I see Special Order 40 in its current state. It's just a floor, it's not a ceiling. There's a ton more that could be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Browning?
Good afternoon. Thank you for opening this time for us for public comment.
Christine, 1 second. Also, can we get Val Carlson and Mary Ann Curtis also prepared to come up. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a retiree and a student at Los Angeles City College. At the college, I work with a group called Ideas at LACC, which is a student organization organized to serve and protect immigrant students, both documented and undocumented. I find these young students to be so strong, and they're really in a very precarious position right now, frightened for themselves and their families. I commend your idea of establishing a program for volunteer attorneys to provide letters of representation for deferred action for childhood arrivals, the DACA students. However, these students are really concerned about themselves and their families and friends, their whole community. I believe that this should be extended to cover all immigrants. We have to provide legal services for them. Well, I hope you take this recommendation seriously, knowing these students as being, very valid human beings who want to have a good education and jobs and have a solid future for themselves and their communities. We have to do the right thing for humanity in our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Val Carlson. I'm representing the Freedom Socialist Party today. I'm here in support of many of the provisions in Peter Shea's proposal. I'm also urging you to include the language that was presented to you on September 8th when over 1,200 people presented signatures on a petition were presented to you and the mayor, calling on you to declare Los Angeles a sanctuary city and designate all city buildings, properties, programs, vacant lots, everything ice-free zones. I appreciate the comments or the recommendation that Los Angeles be ice-free and homeland-free and arrest-free for DACA students and dreamers, but I think there's a lot of other people who need that protection as well, as far as the city can extend that through its own properties and so forth. I think that the recommendations from Peter Shea to create a human rights commission are good, but that needs to be a very strong commission. The commissioners should be elected or in some way selected so that they represent the affected communities and not just appointed by you and approved by the mayor. The history of these kind of, I'm an attorney and I've practiced in discrimination law for over 30 years, and the history of these agencies is that they start out strong as law enforcement entities trying to enforce the laws against discrimination, and they end up as neutral mediators, fact finders, in which the employers and the defendant side simply overwhelms them, and the poor individuals trying to assert their rights don't find relief there. I also want to mention, with respect to the decriminalization, that we need to go farther than just decriminalizing and turning these things into infractions. Infractions turn into fines and tickets that poor and immigrant people can't pay, and then they're stuck in jail forever in what has now become a debtor's prison here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Ann.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Ann Curtis, and I'm speaking on behalf of the retiree chapter of American Federation of State Municipal Employees. I'm an active unionist with this public sector union, and I'm here in support of the city's defense, full defense of immigrants and the homeless, many of whom are immigrants. And I would urge you, while you are studying and working on reports, to consider the situation facing immigrants and the homeless an emergency. And just backing up what Ms. Carlson said about declaring all city properties safe places for immigrants where ICE cannot enter and detain. And also to add that, and I know there's a lot of support for this, even from the city controller, is to open vacant city properties to homeless encampments and shelters while the city is trying to figure out what to do and building supportive housing, which is going to take forever. These issues are very connected, and many families are extremely anxious and worried about not only detention and deportation, but losing their housing through evictions. I've seen the city council approve many, many developments for high-end, high-income housing, but we've got to be able to keep our workers here in the city housed, and our retirees and our elder folks, and you know, we've all worked here and been here for many years, and I think the least the city can do is really focus on calling this an emergency and getting people the housing and the help and the services they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Doyle.
Before my time begins, if I could just, we're being told that you're not accepting new cards, and particularly given the fact that the October meeting was canceled, we'd ask you to be lenient and allow some latecomers to sign up.
Okay, latecomers, sign up. Don't be late next time, please. If it's important, be on time.
Thank you. I'd like to bust some myths. Myth number one, that the LAPD does not collaborate with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security in immigration enforcement. We hear that in public statements from Chief Beck, from Mayor Garcetti, and we've heard similar statements even from city council members. The fact is that they, as previous speakers have stated, LAPD does collect information which puts undocumented immigrants at risk. It provides jail access to ICE without judicial warrants, which they are not required to do. They participate in task forces that result in collateral arrests based entirely on immigration status, folks who are never actually charged with a crime. All of these activities, you may not call them collaboration, LAPD may not view them that way, but they make ICE's job easier. This collaboration is one of the most important tools in ICE's toolbox, and you, as a city council committee, have the power to remove that tool from their toolbox, and I urge you to do so. Myth number two, Special Order 40 in any way, meaningful way, prevents this collaboration. It was a significant, largely symbolic move at the time, but its purpose has become outdated, and it desperately needs to be revised and brought into line with current needs, and we urge this council and individual council members to make the case to LAPD for a strict separation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. Myth number three, SB 54 makes us a sanctuary state. It would have, in its original form, drawn a clear double yellow bold line between law enforcement and immigration enforcement. Unfortunately, right now it's a dotted yellow line, and that bill at best added a few dots. It unfortunately allows for a lot of moving back and forth between those lanes that should be kept separate, and we urge you to do everything in your power to make those two lanes separate. Thank you.
Patricia Suarez and David Abud.
Buenas tardes, yo quiero dar mi testimonio porque mi hijo y yo estamos atravesando por la orden de deportación.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to provide my personal testimony. My family and actually my son is currently in deportation proceedings.
Desde que yo llegué a este país, siempre lo que a mí me atrajo es que sus leyes son muy respetables.
What attracted me and why, one of the reasons why I decided to immigrate to this country was because the U.S. has laws and respectable laws as opposed to other countries.
Tanto es así que cuando mi hijo empezó a tener problemas, la policía me ayudó a controlarlo a él, pero Tal vez eso fue un error porque al ayudarme eso, mi hijo con ese delito fue como portador para la deportación.
So my son started having problems. I reached out to the police department, who at that time I looked up to, and I figured that they would be able to intervene and help my son. However, that proved to be a mistake because of that interaction that my son had with the LAPD. He was then placed in deportation.
Ante la sociedad, mi hijo, y ante un juez que él fue juzgado, mi hijo fue rehabilitado. Él está rehabilitado, pero lo que yo me pregunto, ¿por qué las personas tienen que ser juzgadas 2 veces? Si ahora que yo me estoy preparando para el examen de ciudadanía, en la Constitución y sus leyes civiles dicen que todos tenemos oportunidades.
So when my son is actually or was had to attend court and came in front of a judge, he was provided with an opportunity. He was given a chance. However, I don't understand why folks who are undocumented get to be criminalized all over again. I'm currently studying for my citizenship test, and the U.S. Constitution states that everyone should undergo a fair trial, and the laws should be applied to everyone evenly. However, that hasn't been the case.
También yo quisiera que ustedes como que tienen el poder de ayudar a nuestras comunidades, hicieran de verdad ese gesto de compasión hacia nuestras comunidades y de verdad nos ayudaran en la manera que nos protegieran. Porque si todos ya seguimos bajo la ley, cumplimos todo con la ley, ¿por qué se nos sigue criminalizando cuando nuestro único crimen es hacer el trabajo que otros no quieren hacer, pagar taxes que otras personas no quieren pagar?
So I urge our elected officials to please take a stand and protect our the undocumented community. We are deemed as criminals under the law. However, we try to do the best that we could. We work, we pay taxes, and it's time for the elected officials to stand up and really protect each and every one of us.
Tanto es así que yo no me muevo de California, porque California es un estado que nos da muchos beneficios, nos da mucho apoyo, lo que otros estados no tienen. Y además, California es un estado que tiene grandes sentimientos, grandes representantes que yo creo que sí tienen compasión por nuestras comunidades.
So one of the reasons why I remain and won't move to another state is because I understand that California is known to have policies that protect immigrants, and I would like that to stay true.
Y yo quiero que ustedes juntos conmigo luchen, así como yo estoy luchando por la libertad de mi hijo y que él obtenga una residencia aquí, también ustedes luchen junto con varias madres y familias para que tengamos una legalización justa y de veras ejerzan nuestros derechos civiles de cualquier ser humano.
And just like I'm fighting for on behalf of my sons, I want to make sure that elected officials also do the same and protect our immigrant communities.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is David Aboud. I work with day laborers here in Los Angeles County as well as undocumented and documented immigrants every day. I myself am an immigrant and also resident of Boyle Heights. And one of the reasons that some of us are late today is because we are baffled by the level of inaction that we continue to see from the City Council. And I say this in a respectful way because I know that you might have the right intentions, But we need to see more action from you, and we're tired of not seeing action. It's been a year since this committee was established, and we have seen almost nothing come of it. We've only seen very piecemeal things, and now we are at the verge of seeing a very damaging policy be passed by the LAPD with almost no action from the Immigration Affairs Committee. So I think all of my fellow people who have come up here and spoken have stated very eloquently the things that need to happen. And I just want to be here to urge you to act as an immigrant myself, as a resident of Los Angeles, that we really need to see some action. And people are still scared. We haven't seen the kind of level of action that the most heavily immigrant city in the nation should be having. We are the most heavily immigrant county, the most heavily immigrant city. There are millions of people who are undocumented and people who are foreign-born in this county. And so for us to not see that the same kind of level of urgency from you all is really disheartening for us and our communities and the people that we work with every day. So I urge you to really start taking a strong stance. We've given you all of the information that you need. We've given you memos and letters and petitions and requests and meetings. And I think the information is in front of you for you all to start making strong and bold decisions to actually start protecting our immigrant communities. Thank you.
Okay. Item 3 is... Okay, so let's, thank you. We're closing public comment. And we want to move to item number 1. Get this thing out.
Item number 1 is a mayor report relative to the appointment of Ms. Rochelle Ray Weezar to the Commission on the Status of Women for the term ending June 30th, 2022.
Ms. Weezar, would you like to join us at the table, please? You want to introduce yourself and tell us about your excitement to join this commission and all the great things that you intend to do?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, council members. It is a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And I do have to, before I continue, I have to apologize for the throat lozenge. I'm not sure if I'm coming down with something, with a cold, or if it was all the yelling I did at the television last night. Thank you for your consideration. I also want to thank the mayor for giving me a chance to once again serve the city in this new capacity as a member of CSW. And I also want to say that if I am confirmed, I look forward to working with each of you, the full council, the mayor, and commissioners on bringing positive change to women and girls in Los Angeles. A little background about me. I was born in Los Angeles, grew up in Downey, attended high school in Alhambra at Ramona Convent Secondary Preparatory School, which is an all-girls Catholic high school. I graduated from UC San Diego with a bachelor's degree in history and a minor in political science. I received my law degree from UCLA School of Law. And while I was at UC San Diego and UCLA, I worked a number of years with an attorney who handled private adoption and dependency cases. And it was really my experience working with her and the fact that I myself am an adoptee that inspired me to use my law degree to advocate for women and children. And so I spent 10 years serving the city as staff to the Commission for Children, Youth, and Their Families. And as some of you might know, the Commission at the time was really the city's conscience when it came to the most vulnerable and youngest residents in our city. I started in 1996 as a policy analyst. I moved on to policy director, and when I finally left CCYF in 2006, I was the assistant executive director. Since my departure from the city, I've done some consulting work for a mid-sized law firm. I've served as a development director for Salesian High School in Boyle Heights. I'm currently a member of the board of directors for Puente Learning Center in Boyle Heights. I am also serving on the Arts High Foundation, which supports a nationally recognized high school, the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, which is located on the Cal State LA campus. I'm also a founding and current member of Los Compadres, which is a philanthropic group that supports Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And I also support organizations like Girls Today, Women Tomorrow, which is located in Boyle Heights. It's a mentoring youth leadership program for young women ages 12 to 21. And I also help support other organizations like HOPE, which stands for Hispanas Organized for Political Equality. And last but not least, I'm a mother of 4 amazing children. So why CSW? I'm a woman. I'm raising 3 daughters here in Los Angeles, so I care deeply about the status of women and girls. I care about the future of my daughters and all the other daughters that are out there in Los Angeles. I recently read a report that was published by CSW, I think back in 2015. It was a data report. And the report says that of the nearly 4 million people living here in Los Angeles, 2 million are women. So that makes, we're 50% of the population. And of that, 72% are women of color. And of those, 48% are Latinas. The report also says that about 1/3 or over 1/3 of the households here in Los Angeles are run by women. They're headed by women. And the report also, I think, confirms for most of us what we already knew, and that is women earn less than men. Women living in poverty is higher, and the unemployment rate among women or compared to men is either equal or higher. And what that tells me is that if as a city we can do right by our sisters, then everyone benefits. So as women, we've made strides, we've won victories, but certainly there's much more work that needs to be done. So serving on the Commission on the Status of Women would be an incredible opportunity to address some of those gender inequities. And I would really like to be a part of helping the city to move that needle of progress.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was looking around the committee. I was the only member of the council that was fortunate enough to be here when Ms. Weezar served as the assistant general manager. Worked very, very closely with her, begged her, tried to talk her out of moving on at that point in time. If we had staff and general managers and assistant general managers that were as responsive as she was, then we would be able to move this city further ahead, and we do it in a faster fashion. So it is based on past experience that I would wholeheartedly recommend that we move this appointment forward. Plus, she would go outside. She was in all of the districts, and I really appreciate it, how you recognized how important it was to do a lot of outreach, and she had a knack of getting communities that weren't all that engaged. You'd go to an event, and it would be full, and so I'm glad that you're going to serve some more, and I support that.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind words. And I do vividly remember the policy forums that we hosted in your district.
Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to rise and support my good friend, Ms. Wizard, to the appointment of the Commission on Status of Women. What I believe is missing is more diversity. I think it's important to tap into the resources that we have in our community, and what Rochelle brings is that she can identify with communities like mine, with women like me, who have not necessarily had the mentors in place, that women that look just like me. I think that's important for our city. I think it's important for our little girls to see that Latinas in our community in Los Angeles, as diverse as it is, have role models that they can look up to, and I consider Rochelle one of those role models. I've known her for over a decade, and I can attest to your fierce advocacy on behalf of children, youth, and family in our city. She is a fighter, a champion, and a warrior, and the kind of woman that we need on this commission. So thank you so much for your willingness to serve. As a mother, I can tell you I don't have 4 children, but I have one. I almost feel like I have a dozen with my little firecracker. But I just don't know where you find the time to do everything that you do to devote yourself to these very issues that we need you to speak on. So I commend you for this is a non-paid position. I want to emphasize that one more time. It's a volunteer position to serve on this commission, and we need your voice. But I want to applaud, because I know you're raising 4 fabulous kids, and you're a wife, and to do this and put everything else aside to be that leader that we need, I really, really commend you. Thank you very much for your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Council Member. I appreciate it.
Let me echo the comments of my colleagues. Let me note your incredible work with kids with cancer. You know that is a passion of mine, and I appreciate your leadership in that area. And I could not be more eloquent or exact as my colleagues have been. I want to move this. Adoption? So move. So be the order. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment.
Thank you for your vote of confidence.
Thank you. Item 2.
Item 2 are reports from the Chief Legislative Analyst regarding the review of the city's Immigrant and Civil Rights Advocate Special Report Number 1, and also a review of human rights commissions in other cities.
Good afternoon. My name is Felipe Chavez. I'm with the CLA's office, and this is Henry Flatt, also from the CLA's office. Today we have 2 reports to present on this item, and they're both in response to a motion, Cedillo Wesson, which instructed our office to review a report by the Immigrant Advocate and provide recommendations. The motion also asked that we explore the feasibility of issuing letters of representation to individuals who are at risk of deportation. And subsequent to the introduction of the motion, we were asked by the chair's office to also explore the feasibility of establishing a human rights commission with the intent of first providing an overview of what other cities are doing in terms of human rights commissions as described in his report. That piece of it will be reported on by Henry. And I will provide you an overview of Mr. Shea's report. Basically, through the overview, we found that there are 4 general categories that his recommendations and issues of discussions can be put into. One of them is the issue of the Human Rights Ordinance and the Human Rights Commission, which again will be reported on by my colleague.
Excuse me, let me ask Mr. Shea to join us at the desk so that we can also have him engaged in the responses, the conversation.
The 3 other topics are, general topics are the resources for immigrant-related purposes, police practices, and consideration for potential litigation. So in terms of resources for immigrant-related services, the author, Mr. Shea, basically recommends that the city conduct a series of community meetings to explore the possibility of providing Know Your Rights training sessions, the issuance of letters of representation, facilitating public service announcements, and improving legalization programs. So we went through his report and provided as an attachment a summary of all the recommendations that are provided in his report. In terms of support services or resources for the immigrant community, we do want to note that the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs has initiated some efforts in terms of providing education and resources to those that wish to be naturalized. And three of those efforts are the Step Forward LA, Protégete Ciudadanía Ya campaign, and Citizenship Corners. We actually do include a recommendation that the immigrant advocate, Mr. Shea, actually conduct community meetings to engage the community and provide more input with regards to the type of training that would be included in any training sessions that would be provided by the city. The next area of discussion was in relation to police practices. And with this, Mr. Shea provides a discussion section has to do with an executive order that was issued by the Trump administration, which basically threatened to prohibit funding for jurisdictions or municipalities who did not comply with U.S. Section 8, 1373. Basically, if municipalities did not comply with it, then those municipalities would not receive funding. However, the courts have found that basically there is no legal basis for that provision, and additionally, Mr. Shea has stated that in his opinion, the city is in compliance because we have not adopted any laws or any legislation or policies that prohibit the exchange of information with federal immigration authorities. As a result, Mr. Shea suggests that the city, therefore, is not precluded from declaring itself a city of sanctuary or sanctuary city, that is not precluded from providing services or identification cards to its residents regardless of immigration status, that is not precluded from ceasing to question people about their place of birth or immigration status, refusing to honor immigration detainers without a judicial warrant, or refusing to allow immigration and customs enforcement agents to access inmates or providing information to ICE about inmates' release date. Additionally, Mr. Shea's report includes recommendations relative to the review of existing local laws and policies that can be decriminalized. I believe sidewalk vending or street vending was one of the ones that the council has already taken action on. Mr. Shea's report also mentions that there has been initial discussions with the police department with regards to modifications to Special Order 40. LAPD has indicated that LAPD has engaged the community and they have been in contact. Mr. Shea is requesting follow-up meetings to further discuss Special Order 40. Representatives of LAPD has advised that in addition to that, LAPD is reviewing its policies and practices in light of SB 54, which was recently passed, the Truth Act, and the California Trust Act. Another point that is made in Mr. Shea's report is consideration of potential litigation. There are three specific items that are mentioned in his report that he believes deserve more research and possible consideration for future litigation. One of them is an apparent delay in the processing of naturalization applications, which the author attributes to voter suppression. The second one is the expansion of expedited removal for people who have lived in the United States for less than 2 years. So my understanding is that if ICE believes that a person has been in the United States for less than 2 years, they are automatically deported without a hearing. So my understanding was also that this policy was limited originally only to those individuals arrested by the border or around the border, but it's been an expanded practice to more inland into the United States. The third one is the potential, the reclassification of apprehended immigrant children who were formerly classified as unaccompanied children and are now being classified as accompanied children. And the risk with that is that if these children are now reclassified as accompanied children, then they would not receive eligible to receive federal funding for their defense or any federal resources. Additionally, they would be subject to deportation along with their family. We do include, with respect to, we provide two separate recommendations, and we recommend that the immigrant advocate continues to meet with organizations to develop a comprehensive plan to define the content of the proposed Know Your Rights training sessions, to identify the frequency, the location, and identify any potential partners, and report to council in 60 days. And we also request that he report on service gaps or opportunities to improve existing programs, partnerships, and initiatives relative to naturalization process. And lastly, we recommend that the city attorney review and report to council relative to the immigrant advocate's recommendations with respect to policies, police practices, decriminalization of local laws, and proposed topics for potential litigation. And the second report by Henry Flatt will focus on an overview of human rights commissions.
Good afternoon, committee members. As my colleague Felipe Chavez said before you, is a report that responds to a motion.
Mr. Chair, which one are you on now?
He's on the Human Rights Commission. He's going to lay out what the...
It's also item number 2.
It's also number 2.
I'm just trying to follow. So you're doing item number 2 in the resources for immigration-related process? That's what you're talking about?
No. He's doing a survey of the human rights commissions that are taking place in various
So you're
cities.
still on recommendation
still on
number
item
1.
number
Thank
2.
you. That's I wanted clarification because I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Right, but you want to hold that? Okay.
So, before you is a report that responds, like my colleague just said, to a motion that requested our office to examine the immigrant advocate, Mr. Shea's recommendation for the city to establish a human rights commission with an accompanying ordinance. The report provides an overview of commissions in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago that perform many of the functions recommended by Mr. Shea, and it also provides a summary of the current Los Angeles Human Relations Commission. So I'll just provide a brief overview of each commission. So the New York City Commission, called the Commission on Human Rights, was originally established by ordinance in 1955, and basically its original purpose was to prevent against the discrimination of any individual or group because of race, color, sex, gender identity, age, religion, or other identifiable characteristics. Members are appointed by the mayor to 3-year terms. The only person that receives compensation is the chair, and it has an estimated budget of about $14.7 million. That's New York City, and it also possesses subpoena power if throughout the course of an investigation. The Chicago Commission on Human Relations was established by ordinance in 1990. The commission is set up a little bit differently than New York City. They have 4 advisory councils that were delineated in the original establishing ordinance. The advisory councils are equity, women and LGBT issues, veterans, and new Americans. And the chair of the commission can establish new advisory councils as they see fit based on really what's going on in the community. Members are appointed by the mayor for 3-year terms, and they're confirmed by the council. The estimated budget for the Chicago Commission on Human Relations was $2.4 million last year. The last one that is the last Human Rights Commission that's discussed in the report is the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. A charter amendment replaced the older commission in 1990, and they also have advisory councils similar to Chicago, but they are not specifically named in the charter amendment. It's basically up to the discretion of the chair to develop those advisory councils. Members are appointed by the mayor to 4-year terms and can be removed by the mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Weston.
Yeah, you know, I have some questions where it relates to the possibility of issuing letters to folk from the immigrant community in the event that they are stopped by the authorities, some kind of a document that would indicate that they are represented by an attorney, and their attorney has indicated that they should not, you know, or if they have questions that the authorities need to contact their lawyers. So I'm curious as to what's the hang-up with that. Are we getting pushback from other law firms? Do they not want to do what? You know, because the report, and I know this was a lot, and I appreciate the hard work, but it says additional time is needed to discuss the feasibility. I don't understand that part. I mean, it's feasible or it's not. Why, you know, so that I don't get. So what is happening with that? I mean, I understand we would have concerns about fraud, people maybe duplicating documents, but I would have to believe that there are a number of notaries in the city of Los Angeles that would help volunteer to be part of sessions that we might set in different areas of the district where individuals could come up, meet attorneys who would volunteer, talk to them, and they would receive these documents that then a notary public would sign. I'm just curious as to why is that taking so long?
So our office...
And last, it would, for me, it's not just for students that are under DACA. It's for anybody.
Right.
You know, because it's my understanding that most people that are deported or have issues or do not get out on bail, it's based on things that they said the very first time that they were contacted by federal officials. Correct. So it would seem to me that we would want to try to help that group of people, and if we could do it with something like a letter indicating that they have an attorney, we'd want to do that. Now, maybe I'm dumb here, but I would have to believe that there are enough attorneys in the city and in the county that would want to participate in a program like this if we could properly design it. So that's...
Yes, if I can respond to your question. So we met with Mr. Shea and discussed, his proposal about the issuance of letters of representation. We also had a follow-up meeting with additional organizations to explore the feasibility of establishing a program of volunteer attorneys that would issue these letters of representation. There were concerns that were raised at that meeting, but we're not saying at this time that we're not moving forward and continuing.
So
to
what
explore.
are the concerns? Are there concerns, or is it just that? What are the concerns?
Some of the concerns were about. I believe that we just had an initial meeting where we didn't discuss the nuts and bolts about the actual agreement between the individual receiving the letter and the attorney issuing the letter.
So what I would recommend is, why don't we figure out a way that we could do this? Then we have a meeting and bring in the other organizations, the other attorneys, and lay out how we think that it would work. We would then afford them the opportunity to give input as to how to tweak it or change it so that it elevates their comfort level so that they would participate. Because I know that if I was in this country and I didn't have a document and some federal official came up to me, it would probably scare the hell out of me. But if I had some kind of document where I could indicate that you should question my attorney, I just want to see more. And if the folk doesn't think that they don't think that this works, then we need to come up with something else. But I want this taken seriously. I want us to do whatever it is to, I mean, if it doesn't work, come back and tell me why it doesn't work. So I don't understand, what did they say to you, we need more of this, or we need you to do, what was the concerns, or, you know, are you going to have another meeting? Tell me something is what I'm saying.
Right.
I don't know what so what are you going to do next? What's the next plan?
So yesterday, Mr. Shea and I had a conversation about establishing a follow-up meeting for next week. So we're already planning a next meeting to discuss the letter of representation.
This is very, very, very important to me. Mm-hmm. So it is not something that I'm going to let just go away. If it doesn't work, and trust me, I've had ideas before that didn't work. Just explain to me. This one I think has merit, and I need people smarter than me to figure out how to make it work.
Well, we're here for that, and we will work with Mr. Shea and the different community organizations and develop a plan for you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I feel like this item's all over the place. So you were in the middle of discussing report number 1, Human Rights Ordinance and Human Rights Commission, correct? You didn't even get to resources of immigration-related processes, right? Okay, so I just want to get a sense of where we're going with this, because I kind of agree with Mr. Weston. I'm a bit frustrated. So in regards to setting up a human rights ordinance and how that would work, part of the concern from the CLA's office is that you need to further research whether this is necessary on such an ordinance. But part of it, you also mentioned that this might create liability concerns for the city. What are they?
Basically, if someone says that the Human Relations Commission that we established was supposed to protect me in some way, and then we ended up not fulfilling that obligation, they could sue us.
So that you're not suggesting that we go down this route. See, the report doesn't read like it's a definite recommendation to the city council. It's sort of, yeah, we can do this, but we need further research. Yes, well, maybe we can do that, but we also need to continue to research this. It doesn't give me a sense of a solid recommendation on any of these issues.
And it wasn't supposed to. But basically what the report was supposed to do was just kind of survey what's out there and let us know to come back for additional direction and say, do you want to do something additional?
Mr. Shea, do you agree we need to head in this direction when it comes to putting together a human rights commission? Is this something you recommend wholeheartedly, or?
It is something I recommend wholeheartedly.
Is it something that we can include in our current what is it called? Our Human Relations Commission. Is this something you would recommend, or do you think it needs to be a separate body?
I would see this as being a separate body in the sense that if the full city council agrees to adopt a model human rights ordinance which would prohibit discrimination, retaliation, use of illegal threats on a wide range of bases, not just immigration status. If the city does that, which the federal government has done, it has a federal civil rights, the state has done, it has the UNRWA Act, but the one I've tried to draw for the city would be among the strongest, let's just put it that way. Then you are left with the question of enforcement. How would somebody vindicate their rights under that human rights ordinance or civil rights ordinance? And typically, traditionally, one would vindicate rights by going into courts, going into the court system which I think everybody knows is arduous, it's time-consuming, it's expensive. Most people feel they need a lawyer. And so the proposal here for some sort of a commission does not have to be called a commission, but in essence, it would be a volunteer adjudicatory body so that folks who feel that they have been discriminated against, retaliated against in violation of the new city ordinance would be able to go to this commission made up of a group of volunteers who then would have the power to issue subpoenas, to permit discovery, to hold hearings, to do mediation, but to, in essence, have a pre-court adjudication of the complaint. One could then tie in other ideas such as not only training in the communities through your office, Mr. Cedillo's office, all the officers, could not only do training of members of the community, it's all about self-empowerment, so training about their rights under the new LA ordinance, but we could even train a cadre of community folks who would be trained to represent people with complaints, so you wouldn't need lawyers. And so you take community leaders, or you could also tie this into a leadership development program in essence, so you would take community leaders or people with potential to be leaders in the community and train them to advocate for folks in front of this commission. And just finally, I would say, this is done all around the country in a variety of circumstances, not just human rights, civil rights. There are all kinds of administrative adjudicatory functions under state law and federal law. In any of those, in the end, if somebody's unhappy with the process, they can certainly appeal to the courts. So you couldn't wipe out appeals to the courts, but that's true in every administrative. So that is my recommendation. It's really to give access to low-income people, to people who couldn't really afford a lawyer, to people who may be afraid of the court system, to really give them a remedy, a pre-court system remedy.
To me, this recommendation just feels as though it would give the city more of a structured way to help the people that really need the services and provide them with the real legal representation that they need. This is the feel that I get from this recommendation.
Exactly.
And I also feel that if we're serious about doing something like this, we need to figure out how we're going to fund it. New York, of course, puts about $14 million into an effort like this. San Francisco is somewhere about 3.5. So if we're serious about this recommendation, to me, it's more about figuring out how we're going to fund such a, but it does give me a sense that it would be a more structured way to really help people and not just talk about it and come up with all kinds of ordinances to try to protect people where we're not really putting any real muscle into it. That's my sense. The other thing, and I don't think you've gotten here, I know Mr. Weston asked the question, but Mr. Shea, when you and I sat down in my office, we had a pretty long discussion. I think it was about 3 hours worth of conversation, but you talked about the issuing of letters of representation.
Yes.
And how so many, and I remember, I think I shared with you my father being deported 3 or 4 times before my mom gave birth to me. And in fact, my father was not even in the hospital when my mom was in labor because my father had been deported the day before. And we talked about this piece of almost an identification card, that whenever someone was either pulled over or detained by ICE, it was something they can take out of their wallet, they can hold in their purse and say, here are my rights. I need an attorney before I can speak to you. And that really sunk in with me in terms of running around and trying to, I think it was during the debate of the whole legal fund that we were about to set up and whether it was enough money or not. And how do we get to the 90% of folks that are in this situation, the rights that they need at the time that they need it? And I really like that, and I thought we would get an actual breakdown of how we can somehow fund that and make that happen, because I'm 100% behind that notion. Here is my identification. You don't have a right to question me unless I have an attorney present, period. End of conversation.
Well, I'm very much behind the idea.
I've never heard of it until I spoke to you.
And I think just to answer President Wesson's question to Felipe of a few minutes ago, at least to give you a highlight of that, kind of what are the challenges? And we did just speak yesterday, and we agreed to meet next week with various city advocates to see if we can get their input and iron out issues about the challenges. I mean, I think there's a couple of challenges to this idea. Firstly, I think that, and I'll be brief, but it's fine. If you just, what we've done, and we started doing this 40 years ago, and they did this in the civil rights movement in the South, they would give people a card that says, you know, when the Sheriff Bull O'Connor comes to get you, give him this card and say you don't want to speak, you don't want to answer questions. And that's kind of the way we've done it traditionally, a card. But in our experience, two things or three things happen. One is you're not going to have that contact until a year after somebody gave you the card. And there's a good possibility you've kind of misplaced that card. Number two, it still requires the immigrant to sort of take the blame for exercising her rights or his rights. You can have a card, but it's the immigrant who's somehow there confronting the officer, say, I'm going to exercise my rights, which is difficult for immigrants to do, especially when fear has overcome you. And thirdly, the fear. Fear overcomes people, and they're not as forceful as they might have been during the training and the role-playing that you did 16 months earlier when you were trying to train them to exercise their right to remain silent. It's different. It's like I once went to do parachuting, and they trained me over for several hours about how you go in an eagle thing, and then you count to 10 and you pull your thing. When I actually jumped out of the airplane, I just went into the fetal position. You know, fear overcomes people. And I think that not that a letter of representation will be worked every single time, but it's far more powerful because it takes the burden off of the immigrant. The immigrant can just hand a letter and say, you know what, it's not my fault, it's my lawyer. You may think my lawyer's a jerk, but here, my lawyer's instructed. You shift the blame to the lawyer. That's one thing. Second, I think a person's far less likely to misplace a letter from a lawyer with their name on it than a card that somebody gave them, almost like I lose cards all the time. If I had a letter from my lawyer, I'm just less likely to lose it. And I think thirdly, officers, ICE officers, are more likely to honor a letter with the lawyer's name. They're not fools, and they're more likely to honor that than a card that kind of looks like you could have picked it up. Millions of people could have that card. An ICE agent who looks at this person's got a lawyer is going to think twice about the consequences of moving forward in a way that's illegal to question that person once the letter says. So that's the background. In terms of the challenges, I think that there's two big challenges. One is it's just never been done before. Even I've represented tens of thousands of people got arrested by this or that law enforcement agency. And we've only done this in a very limited number of circumstances when we were doing a union drive and we had a set population that we could work with. Or when I worked with American Apparel, and there was a set group of people in the factory who we could work with. But it's not something that a lot of organizations have done. It's not something, so it's a new idea. I think that's one of the challenges. Anytime you have a whole new idea, a whole new way of doing things that's different, it's always a challenge. And number two, I think it's a challenge because I think lawyers would be reluctant or understandably would be reluctant because the only way this thing works is if one lawyer is willing to issue, I'm not talking about one lawyer issuing 10 or 20 letters, because then great, you'd cover 1,000 people in LA. I'm talking about tens of thousands of letters. The only way you can do that is if you limit the representation to questioning by ICE. That's very important. So the retainer agreement with a client has to be very simple, English, Spanish, Korean, other languages, and has to be very clear. This is strictly limited to questioning by ICE. You actually get arrested, deportation, you get arrested by LAPD, you have a criminal case. This ain't about that. Right. The service I'm giving you, 95% of the service I'm giving you is just this letter. The other 5% would be you could call me if and when you're being questioned, and I can talk to you, I can talk to the ICE agent. So understanding you're limiting the representation to that 5-minute encounter, if it ever takes place. The challenge is going to be getting lawyers to be comfortable with the fact that given that very limited nature of representation, one lawyer can issue 5,000 of these letters, and it's not unethical. You're not promising to take 5,000 people's cases to the Supreme Court, which you could never reasonably do, because the service is pretty much over the second you provide that letter. But it's a novel thought that, gee whiz, I could sign a letter and give it to 5,000 people. So we're studying the ethics of that, and we're 99% done. And at this point, and I have to start circulating this a 2-page memo on the ethical questions to the lawyers. And I am virtually certain, I have to dot a couple of I's and cross some T's, but I'm virtually certain that he does not run into any ethical problems. And precisely because the nature of the time that you're committing is so limited that you could, in good faith, promise to do that for 5,000 people and not run into an impossibility problem, just as you couldn't. If you were just saying the only thing you're going to do is, the only thing I do is I fill out driver's license applications for people who need help with that, or naturalization applications, you can promise to do a lot of those because it only takes a short amount of time. On the other hand, you couldn't promise to take 500 cases in the next year to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because it's humanly impossible to do. So as long as the commitment of the lawyer is reasonable in terms of the amount of time that may be involved and the amount of time that lawyer has in the next year to work, I do not believe you run into any ethical problems. So those are challenges.
So, Mr. Shea, my next question to you on this issue is, I've gone back and spoken to immigration attorneys who are personal friends of mine.
Yeah.
How do we, if the city, I mean, nothing around here ever happens, never happens as fast as I would like it to happen. Is there a way to perhaps do a pilot, and I'm just speaking for myself in my district, because I have attorney friends who have agreed to some degree provide this letter, and maybe to a couple of thousands of people, but nevertheless, is there a way where you can sort of craft something at a manageable level so that we can start going down this road? Because I'm definitely interested in this particular recommendation to pursue it. If I have to pursue it, I'd like to pursue it in my district. Yeah. If we're not ready or can't fully take this to scale, but I would like to move on this recommendation and work with you closely on this, because I really believe that letter is powerful and can definitely ease some of the anxiety that's happening.
I can. Just to wrap this up, I will, we do plan to have this meeting, I'm hoping next Thursday or Friday, and I've got pretty much the whole program written out from a phone app, because people could sign on using a phone app, to a website so people could just sign on. The proposal I'm making wouldn't require you to actually go down and sit down and be assessed by a lawyer. Sure. It can be done a lot more quickly, a lot more efficiently, using easy-to-use, high-tech things that we in the immigrants' rights community haven't been quick to adopt. So I've got pretty much the whole thing scripted out. I've got the ethics memo. And I think within a week, certainly, let's say roughly 2 weeks from now, I could submit to all the members of the committee that outline so that it could be addressed at the next meeting in 4 weeks.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Martinez, I think that you'd have to arm wrestle 14 other members of the council to be the first one to do that.
I spoke up first. They're out of luck.
No, we'll debate that because I helped develop the idea. But the point I'm making is I think this needs to be something that we all do and do at the same time. So listening to what Mr. Shea has said, I think we can do this with some haste, correct?
Yes,
or at least report back to us. And even though I support using the app and the website and all of that, I do think we should not discount some kind of a citywide program a day, because the optics will be important. And I think that what we do in Los Angeles sends a message to other cities throughout the country. So even though we can do an app and online and websites, which is great, there's less manpower, I do think we would want to do this in conjunction with some kind of a physical something, so that other countries, not just in the other cities, not just in this state, but throughout the country, could see that we're doing something like this. But I'm joined at the hip with Ms. Martinez on this. We want to see something. We want to see something quickly, and I think that people, if they get a letter like this, I don't think they'll lose it. I think that this will be every bit as important to them as carrying a driver's license or something else in your purse or pocket or wallet. So if we could just work out the bugs, I really would like, Ms. Martinez, for us to move forward. And if we have to do a pilot, we'll do it in Ms. Martinez's district and mine.
Okay.
Current Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report, first of all. I think the sense is that we all want something to happen sooner than later. So I join my colleagues in urging a speedy adoption of this letter-type idea. And I agree. I think folks will hold on to them. I think, Mr. President, I think folks will get their letters laminated, and they'll be in plastic, and they'll be something that they carry around proudly. So I support the notion of us moving forward with that, and I would support that. I also think we should move forward with the idea of a commission structured around the issues that were presented as relates to discrimination, retaliation, mediating disputes. I think, again, it's an opportunity for a real powerfully composed body, and the pre-court adjudication, I think, is significant. It doesn't take away rights, but helps to sort of channel the discussion and gives folks a chance that they have a place to go. Frequently, filing a big lawsuit, class action lawsuit, or something else is just out of the realm. But if someone can go to the commission with a specific complaint about discrimination or about some other kind of treatment that was taking place, so I think we should pick the best from these models. Certainly, as I said, a body that possesses subpoena power, that's able to bring folks together, and as Councilwoman Martinez mentioned, it's got to have a budget. We got to have money in there. It may not be $14 million or as little as $2 million, but we've got to make sure that there's some funds so that it is a real commission with teeth, with the kind of authority, moral authority that people will use and trust. And so, again, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what the process is, but I certainly would support further action on the commission notion, one that has the kind of subpoena powers that will make it a real tool, and then one, hopefully, with some budget assigned to it that will make sure that we're able to provide services to the community.
Councilmember Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know you're guys still presenting your report, so I don't want to jump the gun, but I concur with everything my colleagues have said, especially the letter, whether it be a letter or whether it be a card. But I was also, and I saw, and I'm jumping ahead, and I know you guys still are finished presenting, but from the recommended actions, I actually wanted to see, I know we're focusing on, one, the letter, and two, focusing on the commission, but there were other parts of the report which I was tempted to try to ask to get it implemented right away, and which was not just the letter, but there was the section right after that, immediate bond hearings to secure prompt release of arrested dreamers. And on that, and whether it's just for dreamers or a larger pool, because we do have money in the fund, and I really wanted to hear how that money could be spent. But in one thing was, especially for Dreamers, where it looks like there's some indication from the feds and the president that it's going to get resolved, but I have no faith in that. So if a Dreamer does get arrested, can we use that money that we have right now, and how do we use that money to at least set bond hearings? And so I was really interested in that because that's something we could do immediately, or at least share a report on how some of the monies could be used for bond hearings. So, and if that's something we could act on too as well, and direct, and I thought we did direct that last time around, but on that section, as well as it looks like you're covering services to legalized status and naturalized long-term lawful residents. That's a longer-term thing, but at least immediately, if we do get her near arrest, what can we do?
Can I respond to that for a second?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I see that as being a sort of a Part B. If the representation letter is considered Part A, which is a proactive program to try to insulate as many of your residents from warrantless arrests as possible. And keep in mind, a lot of people say to me, oh, that's not going to go over very well from a PR standpoint, but just keep in mind, federal law places an incredible restriction on ICE agents in terms of even questioning people, which it's amazing because the way Trump and Jeff Sessions act and all the things they say directed at you as local elected officials, you would think ICE agents have broader powers than local police, and that's not true. It's very circumscribed under federal law, and they don't seem to talk about that or be aware of it. ICE agents under federal law, this is not by case law, this is written right into the statute, they're not supposed to even approach and question a person unless they have a reasonable suspicion that that person is a, quote, alien. They're not even supposed to approach and question you. Now, you would ask yourself, the great majority of ICE arrests are not with a warrant going out to arrest somebody they've really focused on. They're these randomized collateral arrests, just at the bus station, the airport, the Broadway, downtown. They're collateral. How do they stop and question people when under federal law they're only supposed to do it if they have a reasonable belief the person is a, quote, alien? Well, I can tell you how. And it's in 99% of the cases, it's just racial profiling. They don't have any other basis to stop this one person, this man, this woman, and say, oh, let me talk to you about your immigration status. They're only supposed to do that if before stopping a person under federal law, they have a reasonable suspicion that person is, quote, an alien. So my challenge, and what I'm calling on the city and the community-based groups, is to challenge what is basically an institutionalized racial profiling program by ICE. Now, that's Part A. Now, to get to what Councilman Rue was talking about, the bond hearing, to me that's Part B, and I would make it part of the overall program. And I'm working with a national coalition, and we're running a test of this right now in Maryland with a good community-based organization that does a lot of immigration work. And it's this: if somebody does get arrested, and you know, I always say, if you go out and question the immigrant community and with the parents or the children, you say, what's the most important thing to you? They won't say, what they will say, I'll cut to the chase, is I don't want to get arrested. Because if I don't get arrested, I don't have all the other problems that follow from that. So just, I don't want to get arrested. Fine. If somebody does get arrested and you ask them and you poll them, what's the most important thing? You just got arrested. What's the most important thing to you? They won't start talking about, well, what's the theory of my deportation, or what are my defenses, or who can I appeal to, and can I take my case to the Supreme Court? Forget it. The most important thing to them is just getting out of custody. Then you deal with all this other stuff later. It's getting out of custody. And there are enormous problems with being in custody. I don't just mean the dangers from other people there who just got out of prison, who committed a murder, that kind of stuff. is enormous difficulty with confidential attorney-client communication. Just enormous difficulty. You cannot have a confidential attorney-client communication by phone. It's a long, your clients, which I can do, like I'm representing Mr. Matulu Shakur, I told you before. This guy's serving 60 years for killing a bunch of police officers. I can have a confidential attorney-client. I just call up his counselor, and within 24 hours, I can have a 1 hour. I cannot do that with somebody. Also, your deportation case takes place really quickly. If you get out of custody, your deportation case won't be heard for another year or two. Then you got plenty of time to go find a lawyer, go back to school, go back to your family. My point is, getting out is critically important. The way you get out is a bond hearing. I would tie in a Part B to the Part A, which would be pre-arrest preparation for bond hearings. There's set documents that have to be gathered: school records, medical records, bank account statements, lease, rental agreements. Normally, these are collected once the person's arrested, which it takes about 3 weeks to gather these documentation. If as part of our city-promoted program, and so much of this can be done by volunteers, by advocates, you don't need lawyers. We have a checklist. And people could be, without scaring them, you've kind of unscared them by giving them the representation letter. But if people could then be encouraged to get involved in a program to gather up the documents that you will need should you ever get arrested, so that they're ready to go, then you could do immediate bond hearings and put tremendous support into pro bono lawyers and community-based lawyers, legal aid lawyers, focusing on those bond hearings. We can provide them with training, et cetera, so that the bond hearings are done as effectively as possible. And the goal should really be, there's two types of detention: mandatory detention and discretionary detention. The goal in Los Angeles should be no LA resident gets held in discretionary detention simply because they cannot afford a lawyer or they cannot afford the bail. That's anybody who's eligible for discretionary detention, whether they a dreamer or not, whoever they are, if they're a resident of Los Angeles, our goal should be, no, in effect, no discretionary detention of LA residents. We're through intelligent programming and planning, and then good representation when the rubber hits the road for that hearing, we're pretty much going to get everybody out of custody. And again, the benefit to the city just put up a lot of money, along with the county, to do deportation defense work for people in custody. Those hearings take place very promptly, very quickly. But if you get that person out of custody, the hearing's going to... I just got 2 people out of custody a few months ago here in LA. The hearing's put off for 2 years. They're not going to need a city-funded lawyer. They're going to go back to work, and about a year and a half from now, they're going to select their lawyer. So there's multiple benefits by really focusing on the point that you've raised, which is as Part B, to focus on bond and getting people out of custody and preparing for that negative event early on. So in LA, there should be a minimal number of people who remain in detention.
So if we could add some sort of administrative how that gets done. So I would really like to see that execution, or at least a report back on how we execute that.
I can add that as Part B to the report I submitted in a couple of weeks to the chairman and the other members of the committee.
And just as a point of information, I did have a conversation with the California Community Foundation, which is administering the Justice Fund, and they did say that under their contract, they also provide funding for bond hearings.
Even better.
Yeah, but that's not enough.
Right. Because, Mr. Chair, the point is, right now, based on issues on immigrations have kind of simmered down, but you just don't know when it's going to start up again. And we don't want to be caught flat-footed and trying to scramble at the last minute. How do we get this money out, or how do we do bond hearing? How do we do all these things? I just want to have these protocols in place so that the next time the the feds or the president acts up again, we are ready to respond. Because till now, even though we've been here for a year, it's literally been playing catch up because so much has changed literally on a day-by-day basis. So I just want to make sure that while there is some relative calm right now, that we are prepared going forward on exactly how we execute on these things.
Yes, let me add to this mix here. Mr. Shea, I think that the practical problems here are the questions of infrastructure and what is the infrastructure that the city has, our libraries, our work source centers, etc. How do we utilize those infrastructures, the very real infrastructures, to inform and educate, train, and prepare immigrant residents of the city? That's number one. Number two, how do we use the electronic infrastructure of the city, its websites, its communication? Every week, 15 council members communicate to their district. Every week, the mayor communicates to the city of Los Angeles. How do we use that infrastructure? How do we use the websites of the city as the portal for these letters, for this information, for the series of instructions, the Know Your Rights list that people must have? There is precedent for this. One of the current city attorneys was working for me in 1994, in which she created a student bill of rights and responsibilities, and students utilized that to organize their protests. There were thousands of students who walked out of their high schools during that time period, and so that information is available. During my tenure in the legislature, we created a letter based on case law for immigrant motorists to give to DUI checkpoints because their cars were being seized unlawfully, and they could use that to inform the law enforcement community that they were possibly engaging in actions that were illegal and might have consequences for them, their department, and their city. So precedent exists, but what we have today was what we didn't have before is an incredible capacity to use, one, the strength of the city, its image, its institutional gravitas, and we have new means of communication through social media that can access our immigrant residents in the city of Los Angeles so that they can be informed to exercise their rights. You're absolutely correct. Exercising your rights is difficult, whether you're a citizen or not. Probably more challenging if you're undocumented. We're asking people to look at a law enforcement officer, look them in the eye and say, I'm not going to comply with your directive. Here's my letter, or here's my app, here's my card. Whether you're a citizen or not, that's a difficult thing to do. And so the most that we can do is train people, arm them, inform them, and then give them the tools in those instances where ICE may not comply. We're not talking about an institution, you're absolutely right, that legally there are many restrictions on ICE, but we know that in this city, for example, they walked around saying that they were the police. Yeah. And so controlling ICE isn't simply a matter of us knowing the law, but it's a matter of actually executing at a very broad scale. And Ms. Martinez is taking the leadership in offering to do a pilot with the president of the council. She wants something done, and we all want something done now sooner than later, but we're asking people to do that. I think, though, I will say this to you as we go into the next item, because I think the CLA has enough direction from us, that is a preferred response rather than the horrible meetings I attended at the beginning of this year with clergy, council generals, the city family, the county family, mental health, healthcare, where we were informing immigrants about what to do to be prepared if they were deported, who their children would go to, who their family members would report to. This is a preferred choice and a great opportunity for the city to do something that will protect and create real sanctuary for the residents of the city of Los Angeles. So, any questions from CLA and the direction forward?
No, sir. We're clear.
For me, Council.
Yes.
I think it was Mr. Price that talked about you in regards to the Human Rights Commission, you would like a budget, subpoena power, and a composition of a commission in a subsequent report? Any additional details that?
Mr. Price?
Yes. I'd like to see that.
Quick question from Ms. Martinez.
So, were you finished with your report, or you still have, you didn't even get halfway through?
No, I basically finished.
You're done? Okay.
I just wanted to provide an
I thought you were
overview.
going to hit all the 4 different recommendations. But Mr. Shea, I wanted to ask you, did you take part on any of the community meetings with LAPD with regards to Special Order 40?
I did.
Are there any suggested updates that you see or recommendations that reflect the mayor's directive that you would be comfortable sharing with us?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you asked me about this subject as well. Obviously, from the standpoint of the community, well, that was fairly clear by the different people who spoke during the public sort of comment period. Namely that there is a high level of concern and a high level of anxiety, undoubtedly intensified because of the federal announcements and the federal policies, etc. But those have seemingly stimulated the mayor and the chief of police to want to revise Special Order 40, which I totally support. I mean, I've dealt with that Special Order 40 for Lord knows how many decades, and it certainly is outdated, and other cities are light years ahead of the city of Los Angeles in terms of their policies. So I did meet, in my capacity as the advocate, I did meet with Chief Beck and several of his folks about, whenever it was, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, and then I had a follow-up meeting with the people that are actually involved in drafting their position just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I plan to meet with them again in about a week. I think there are areas, without getting into details at this point, I think there are areas of concern. I mean, I think there's goodwill. I mean, I think the mayor's office has goodwill on this. I think the chief of police has goodwill on this. I'm sure the police commission has goodwill. But there are very tough questions, and there are no easy answers to these tough questions. And there are tough questions because, in essence, on the one hand, if you're strictly an advocate in the community, or you're an immigrant in the community, or the more that you hear that LAPD is cooperating with ICE, the less likely you are going to be to report violent crimes, and the more criminals are going to walk free. There's no question about that. I mean, everybody agrees with that. But then you do have to listen to the other side. What Chief Beck or his folks would say is, yeah, but what if we have somebody who was deported before after being convicted of murder, and they served their time, then they got deported, and we run into them on a street stop, and they're back here illegally. For the same reason you say we shouldn't be involved with ICE because people won't report crime and it'll promote crime. If we just let that guy keep walking around L.A., he could kill somebody again. It's sort of two sides of balance, and it's tricky. It's tricky because there's no set statistics or formula, but there's also no question that the more you push this side up, let's say cooperate with ICE, the more reporting is going to go down. The less you cooperate with ICE. So it's a tricky area. I'm happy to, and would like to, share with you perhaps the same 2-week schedule, because it's not something I'm brand new to. I mean, I've had these meetings, I've thought about this a lot. I've studied the policies of about 20 other cities. So perhaps in the same, if it's agreeable to the chairman and the committee, perhaps in the same time frame in 2 weeks, I can present you, the committee, with a report where I'd both explain as well as I can the changes LAPD is thinking about, and I can explain those parts that I think at least make sense to me, and those parts that maybe don't make sense to me. And then I would echo just what the other folks have said this morning, that at least I think the one other thing I would like to research for you is your leverage in the situation, because in having discussions with various members of the city council, there's a general impression, which I think is generally true, that, well, when it comes to policy, it's the police commission and the chief that have to deal with that. We don't deal with that. But I want to drill down on that a bit and look at that a bit more carefully, because there are a multitude of cities who haven't taken that position. Right. They may have a police commission, and they have a mayor, and they have a chief of police, but they've also passed ordinances that didn't just focus on the police, focused on every city employee, but it included the police. And that's all over the map. San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Santa Ana, you name it, the city of Santa Fe, Portland, Oregon, Washington. They have all passed ordinances that ultimately dictate. They didn't just leave it up to the police or the police commission. So I'm not saying, maybe my research will disclose that, yes, you do have that authority, one way or the other. And then I'm not even at this point suggesting you exercise, maybe you should exercise that authority, but even if you don't, it is a little troubling when I met with these guys, and I said, well, who are the players? And they said, well, there's the chief, well, there's X over at the mayor's office in their Immigrants Affairs office, who they're dealing with, and then there's 2 members of the police commission. And of course, we listen to the community, but those are the real players. And I kind of thought to myself, well, where's the city council of this equation? You know, shouldn't they be having input into this process? And I think so I guess what I'd like to do, with the chairman's permission, is to share some ideas with you within a 2-week frame. And I told the LAPD when I met with them about a week ago that I want to have a quick follow-up meeting and then a follow-up meeting with the chief. And I said, maybe members of the city council would want to be at that meeting. And they said, oh, you know, okay. So I do think, number one, we've got, just to repeat, number one, we've got to look at what is your leverage. And just understand that. If the fact you have the leverage doesn't mean you'd exercise it, but at least in going into these discussions, you could say, you know what, we have this leverage. We could pull the trigger on this if we really wanted to. And number two, just to the extent there's some substantive issues in that weighing of that cooperation versus encouraging reporting, I'll share my ideas, but members of the city council might well then want to have input and have a meeting with the chief and invite somebody from the mayor's office, maybe invite these 2 people from the commission that are dealing with us to say, hey, here are some of our concerns. We're equally as responsible as the chief of police or the mayor for the safety and the well-being of the residents of the city of Los Angeles. So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would definitely agree with bringing this item back for further discussion in 2 weeks or whenever you set the date for the next meeting. Appreciate your honesty.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. President? Okay. So you're going to bring that report back.
Yep.
We'd like to also know, earlier we had talked about the challenges. We're interested in who is prepared as we train immigrants throughout the city to, quote, lawyer up. Who are those lawyers going to be? Will the Guild, National Lawyers Guild, step up? Can we count on the ACLU? Will MALDIF step forward? The National Association of Immigrant Lawyers. There's a whole range, public counsel, of people of goodwill who want to use the law to protect immigrants. Can we count on them to engage in this, I think, Mr. Shea, a very innovative, creative, but I think ultimately the most effective tool for immigrants in the city is to educate them and organize them to defend their own self-interest with the law on their side. Can we count on them to join us in that massive effort? So, clear, Felipe?
Yes, I'd like to just confirm your recommendations. So in addition to the recommendations in the report, you're also seeking to continue to the discussion and report back with the program in relation to the letters of representation, with a possible pilot or citywide program, report back on the bond hearings, and Human Rights Commission budget implications.
Mr. Chairman, that's the budget and structure, right? The Rights Commission budget and a structure.
Yes.
Right, for all items, budget and infrastructure for all items.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll work with Felipe on that over the next few weeks.
That's great. Okay, clear. Can we go to item, yeah, so we're going to move that item on consent, right? And now we're at item number 3, which is on consent. Which is what? One second here. Item 3 is the report back on Senate Bill 54.
Item 3 is a motion, Wesson Cedillo Price, relative to the requesting the city's immigrant and civil rights advocate to report regarding the impact of SB 54, and also for the police department to report on the impact of SB 54 on city's policies, practices, procedures, and protocols.
Yes, Mr. Rue, do you want to move that on consent?
So moved.
Okay. Mr. Price, is that good with you?
That's fine, thank you.
I think the question we asked was, and we heard earlier on public comment, that the question about whether or not this is the floor or the ceiling, and that should be considered in in part of the discussion on the report back.
Okay.
Okay. Any other items?
Did you vote on item 3?
Yes, it was consent.
Okay, yeah, no other items, sir.
No other items. With that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us for 2+ hours. Thank you very much.